who is at the Chief Economist at the Minerals Council of Australia and has held senior positions across government and the private sector. Before I go any further, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which I'm joining you from today, the Kaurna people in Adelaide. I'm sure you're joining me in paying your respects as the elders past, present, and emerging. First, so today we have the opportunity to do the second episode in our coffee chat series, which is intended to be short, sharp insights that are useful for people working in mine closure and transitions. And while we've tailored it to the needs of people in CRC time projects, we've opened it up more broadly because we know these insights are relevant to people across the sector. And I know that many people know Ross, so give Ross a wave if you know him. Or wave in the chat because cameras aren't on, or they might be soon. So to now move on, I've got 4 questions that will be the focus of our discussion today. Ross, so let's kick off, Ross. There's a lot to get through. First of all, so tell us if you're deep in economic policy every day. And there's always a lot of discussion about the mining industry in the news and the media and in policy discussions. What are the top 3 things that researchers should know about the mining industry investment and operating context at the moment?
Well, Gillian, it's not an easy question to answer, very simply, but I think the first thing to appreciate is understand the broader context. Now, when we're looking at the conditions the industry has to operate under at the moment, and probably for quite some time, we're seeing it at a time where there are these mega trends that are sort of, I characterize them as colliding. They've been in play, obviously, they're mega trends, they've been there for a while, now they're coming in to collide. And what we're seeing globally is the impact of demographic change, massive technological advancement, geopolitical shifting sands or fragmentation, depending on how you want to characterize that. And then the other one, which is really important, is deteriorating environmental conditions. And these things are driving a lot of the policy responses we're seeing today. And where mining's caught up here in it is that it's affecting the macro trends that this industry has been exposed to. So, we're looking at this fragmentation that's happening in the world. It's having impacts on markets. Critical minerals is a really nice example. We've got opaque markets. We've got markets that don't operate very efficiently. There's a lot of activity that's captured by some dominant participants. That has implications on how the industry has to respond through investment in its operating. But then you sort of move through and look at, we're also seeing mining globally being challenged by declining ore grades. It's not as easy to find this stuff and to get this stuff out of the ground as it used to be. And that's got implications by the way we develop mines, where we develop mines, and the way we operate those mines. And ESG is playing a massive role here too, and how the industry has to really change its business models, change its approach where necessary to meet the expectations on a range of broader fronts than is not just mining. And then, lumped in with that and associated with it is the technological change that the industry has experienced. Massive developments taking place in terms of these business models once again, but also having really potentially beneficial impacts on things like safety outcomes, environmental impacts, and social engagement.
That's really interesting, Ross. One thing I just wanted to dig deeper into, and that's the name of our webinar series, just quickly, is what are and we hear a lot about critical minerals. Is there anything you can expand on a little bit about how the operating and investment context for critical minerals in Australia?
Yeah, and critical minerals, I think, is a really interesting case. Shifting sands in terms of what are critical minerals. Now, if we sort of cast our mind back 12, 18 months ago, we had a critical mineral strategy, pretty well defined what critical minerals that Australia is focusing on, predominantly for the clean energy transition. Now, with defence becoming a big factor in play, I wouldn't mind sort of betting that critical minerals might be revised a little bit to sort of meet the requirements in terms of defence outcomes. So for Australia, we're all aware, everyone on this call is aware of the significant opportunity that's at hand given our resource endowment. When it comes to investment, though, we're really not seeing the level of investment that we were anticipating, 12, 18 months ago. And this comes back down to what I sort of touched on just a little bit earlier. The markets for a lot of these critical minerals are not very mature. They're not very efficient, which means it makes it very hard for a project to become commercial in Australia at the moment. We have very high cost stacks that the industry has to overcome, and there is still a lot of uncertainty with respect to just what the investment conditions are looking like within Australia, and any of that uncertainty gets factored in terms of the trigger price for that investment. So it tends to raise it, which means that those investment conditions are particularly challenging. And I'll just give you a quick example. Last year we had something like 23, 24, we had $36 billion worth of mining investment came into Australia, right? Now, when you look at the real net stock of capital in mining, now that's the stock of capital investment in mining that's been adjusted for inflation and depreciation. That capital stock hardly budged upwards. And it's actually been plateaued now, kind of plateaued, for the last 7 years. So most of that investment, that new investment, is going into sustaining capital, not new investment into new projects. So this is the big challenge we've got in front of us, but I also think it's the massive opportunity we've got in front of us too.
That's a really interesting that's a really important point of view, and it raises a range of different interesting questions. And I just want to put it in a practical point of view in terms of what that means, like a practical policy point of view. So what that means, how would you describe, or how do you see that as translating into the industry's policy priorities?
Yeah, well, and in several ways. The first one is it really emphasizes how we have to have the fundamental policy settings right to attract investment. And what I mean by that is that cost stack that I was alluding to before. It's ensuring that our energy policy is done in a way that is not putting undue cost on business. It's ensuring that we've got the right workplace conditions to allow the industry to have flexibilities that it needs to really respond to a very uncertain environment. But it's also the right level of taxation. It's the right level of work skills and the workforce requirements. So it's those fundamental policy settings, and I think there are definitely opportunities there for improving them. In terms of our policy priorities at the moment, we're looking at ensuring that taxation on the industry is not going to sort of impede investment. We're looking at particularly environmental approvals. How can we work with government to ensure that we're getting the outcomes that everyone wants, but we're doing it in a way that isn't placing undue burden on proponents? And we're looking at it in terms of the energy climate change policy too. Once again, we know what the outcomes are that the government's policies are wanting to achieve. Well, how do we best achieve those policies? And that's through the policy settings.
Is there anything so we are working in the mine closure and post-mine transition phase. So that kind of, you can't, obviously we want to get as good outcomes as possible for the environment and for people and communities. Is there any policy settings that you see linking directly to the mine closure and transition point of view, noting that the MCA predominantly looks at federal policy.
Yeah, look, and I think with respect to that, I'd almost be bold enough to say, Gillian, it was all of the above because I know where your focus is, but let's be honest, the real opportunity here too is not only on what happens to existing mines, it's how do we ensure that when we're getting new mines up and going, that they're actually factoring in to the highest possible extent what they're going to do at the end of the day. And so a lot of the policy settings have to take that in place to ensure that initially we're getting the investment. Secondly, we're getting the investment that needs to cater for these really important outcomes. Where we've been doing a little bit, not direct work on, but we have been involved, particularly with the Productivity Commission, with their circular economy consultations, and more broadly, we've got an interest, obviously, in circular economy, is trying to weave a lot of this sort of circular economy thinking into that point of, well, what does it mean not only through the when you're dealing with upfront exploration, the development, the production, but also the closure. And I think there's some really good opportunities there as well with respect to that sort of circular economy lens, because where we're going there is, and I think what's been evident too in terms of this whole critical minerals pivot, is we know that in some of these operations, what's sitting in those tailings too are going to be pretty valuable. And the key thing there is how do you sort of preserve the optionality of having those materials there? What do you need in terms of technologies to better extract and process them out of them? And how does that fit in more generally with what it means for end of mine life?
That's a really important question. Before I've got one more to add, and then I might go to Stephen. Did you want to put your question in the chat, Stephen? It just makes it a little bit easier. So while you're putting it in the chat, I'll ask one more question. So you mentioned a bit more about the circular economy. Would you be able to just talk through some of the priorities that the Minerals Council and the mining industry more broadly put forward in terms of unlocking the potential of the circular economy? We hear a lot about it, but making it practical and on ground impacts is quite a challenge.
Yeah, and I think the where you're going there on the on ground impact is still the challenge. Okay, so I can say that, when you sort of move away from what are you doing with tires, you know, uh, it becomes a little bit vexed. So what we've been trying to do in terms of working with areas within government, Productivity Commission, is really trying to get them to have a framing in mind that allows them to sort of, I think, develop policies down the track that are going to be far more focused on what they are. Because in the work that we've done trying to get our heads around circular economy for mining, um, you know, the issue really is for us, this is about improving materials efficiency, because circular economy is one of those terms that can mean almost anything to anybody. It's like productivity. What does it really mean? You talk to two different. You're having a conversation with somebody. You're talking productivity. You think you know that what you've got in your head is what's in their head. Well, often it's not, and it's exactly the same with circular economy. So where we're sort of going with it is to go, you know, what do we do in terms of really understanding the barriers to why there isn't more circularity in activities, and look at those, and a lot of those are really sort of rudimentary. A lot of them, it's just, because it's outside current business models. It's not in the current framing of how operators think. And associated with that is it's one of those areas where if you're truly trying to deliver circularity, the best time to do it is to build it into a project when you're beginning a project. So we've been trying to look at it from those two aspects: existing operations, what it means for new operations, where the choke points really are. And one of the and one of the choke points. There's probably a couple in that domain, but it really is people's understanding, getting a shared understanding, ensuring there's education about this, ensuring there's awareness about it so that the opportunities can be picked up. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done if we are going to move circular economy away from it predominantly focusing on how we're dealing with material streams that are largely waste focused.
It's something that I've thought about a lot, and it's actually one of the reasons I took this job, which was the amount of waste that needs to be produced, like the amount of mining that's required and the potential waste that comes from that as part of the decarbonisation.
Mm.
We need to look at different ways of understanding mining, of developing and constructing mines, and of closing them if we don't want to make some of the same mistakes from the past. And I think we have an opportunity now.
Yeah, look, Gillian, and I think on that, it's kind of where we would really like to get to, I guess more generally, is rather than circular economy being some sort of bolt-on concept, it's an overarching concept.
Yeah.
You know,
So this is quite a detailed question in the chat, but so I'll add it now. So the government priorities in in the ideal world in Australia and downstream additive manufacturing to uplift regional and rural communities and secure a long-term future for the nation. A big barrier to this is the difficulty in raising investment within Australia, which exposes us to a reliance in offshore investors and offtake agreements. Gosh, this is quite a long question. So I guess how do you think we can change this dynamic and incentivize? So I think the question is, how do we attract more investment in Australia?
yeah, and I think where Stephen's getting to here too is, he's looking at some of the downstream activities. The government's talked a lot about processing to get to advanced manufacturing further down there. Where we've been coming from it at very strongly is if you want to move further down the value chain, you can't do it without having a strong mining sector, which means you need to have very good investment conditions to attract investment. I think where that question's going is, what role can Australia play in terms of the value chain? And my view on it is it'll play whatever role it is best to play. And that'll come down to how competitive are we at the particular activities compared to where those activities can take place elsewhere in the world. There is a reason we don't currently do a lot of further downstream processing of minerals in Australia. And that is because the margins are so tight. Those activities are usually done very close to where they're used. And this is just one of these characteristics of economic geographic location. So we need to ensure we are not imposing higher costs on industry than we need to.
Yeah.
And keep in mind there, that doesn't mean any dilution in terms of outcomes for other policy objectives, but we need to be really efficient at what we do. Australia's only got a population, 27, 28 million people. We do not have a lot of manufacturing activity at the moment. Government, through the Future Made in Australia plan, is trying to do something about that. They may well be able to. Industry policy is always a little bit vexed, but I think where they're heading, this is not a short-term fix. This is something that will take quite a while because there's so many points of activity that have to come together, be created, and be connected. That coming together has actually been connected. And we've got to be good at what we do. So I think there's the opportunity there. I think in terms of just coming back to the question there, we are going to be heavily reliant on offtake agreements and the like for quite some time, because coming back down to those opaque markets, it's really hard to get a project up and get the financing for that project if you can't give those investors a relative degree of reasonableness with the expectation of your returns. And at the moment, that's difficult.
So Ross, we've gone to the kind of the challenges, and that then brings me to kind of what we're the part of purpose we're having coffee chats is to understand what that means for a research perspective. So we've spoken about the broader mining investment context and the policy context and some of the challenges in attracting new investment, as well as the opportunity in the circular economy, and just reflecting that what I'm really keen to understand is, what do you see the opportunity for industry and industry associations to work with researchers to really look at these challenges from a cooperative point of view?
I think there's a lot of opportunity. I really do. And, and we're starting to see that come through with universities in particular. But I think what it needs is it kind of needs a repositioning of the mindset from both the industry and the universities in terms of the type of partnerships. The older model was one whereby each knew there was kind of a shared benefit, but they didn't really appreciate each other's incentives and constraints. I think there's got to be greater awareness of just what industry can bring and what universities can bring in terms of a stronger shared partnership. It's not going to happen unless we do have strong collaboration. And that truly means, particularly, I think, in the research organisations, really understanding the practicalities that industry faces doing what it does, so that when the universities are going through doing their work, then that work becomes far more valued as an applied input into trying to solve some of these problems, rather than being something that's kind of nice to see, very interesting, but we can't really use it.
Yeah. So what do you think that I can do differently as external relations and impact director? So how can I help make our research as impactful as possible?
Yeah, I think it comes back down to researchers truly understanding what are the problems, what are the real problems and the real questions that need to be addressed. And the way to do that is the matchmaking with industry, I think, but it's also finding the right people within industry, because at the end of the day, the way we get through this is having very strong, trusted relationships so that we can build upon it. I think the building upon thing is really, really important. So, the researchers are increasing their expertise and their leadership is with respect to expertise, and the industry is actually receiving really valuable contributions that help them address some of the issues, aka impediments, that may be preventing them from undertaking further activity.
And a last question, just to finish off on the research point of view. So maybe two, I might squeeze in two. I'm sorry, Ross, I got excited. I just might add one. What do you think about, what do you think what do you think are kind of the top challenges that we could look at from a research perspective in terms of mine closure? Tom threw this in actually in the chat, so I'm taking his idea.
Look, I missed Tom's one here.
Yeah, no, we had quite a lot. It's what are the top
Yeah,
five knowledge
the
gaps
not
or opportunities?
the knowledge gaps. Well, I think one of the things is at the moment, one of the fraught issues with the nature of this business, because it is so long-lived in terms of these operations, is that when you apply any form of discount rate to it, those benefits that may flow further down the track get discounted very heavily. And, I know there's been a lot of really good work going on trying to understand how better to factor that into the investment decision making. I'm talking about closure, post-closure, all of that sort of thing. I do think we need different frames, analytical frames, for trying to get our heads around that. But I also think it's also looking at it as in terms of, and this is a little bit constrained in terms of the policies at the state and the federal level, is that, what flexibility we have when we're entering that phase to be able to actually produce better outcomes. At the moment, it's pretty prescriptive. I think where it is here is looking at maybe we've got to rethink closure. we've got to rethink just the role of it and the possibilities for it in terms of the benefits that can flow through to not only the place where the activity is taking is happening, but also the associated communities.
I'm glad you said that, because that's that's been a big part of our focus, and I'm really interested and glad you also said the discounted costs, because I know there's a lot of work happening in one of our streams on financial risk and evaluation. The other last question that I'd have is, what do you think? What is the best way for us to share information with industry organizations and with industry? So we do lots of amazing research reports. We do from everything from ESG assessments to looking at opportunity. We've done submissions on the product, the circular economy ourselves, on regional cumulative effects assessment, on collaborative planning. What makes what works in terms of sharing information with the sector from an industry organisation point of view?
Yeah, and that genuinely, Gillian, that's a really good question. I mean, I okay, I as of last week, I was on the Australian Circular Economy Hub Advisory Board. They wound the hub up now, but I was on it for about 5 years, and one of the really most successful initiatives that happened was they created a central place for the sharing of information and the archiving of information. So it did a couple of things. First of all, it was a central resource that was open to anybody that could go in there. If they had any interest, they could find whatever that was, but they could also connect with other people. So there was a lot of sort of knowledge transfer that took place between people that used to go into that centre. And I just think it's developing these. It's trying to find ways of developing communities of interest. That's the critical thing, because it's those communities of interest that actually are the sort of the guardians of the information. They also allow the building upon the information that goes to them, that can sort of be contained, and you get this sort of organic knowledge base that's created. And I think that's got to be an objective of how we do things in terms of disseminating information more generally. We've got great things like AI now that can go through there, but we also know the limitations of that. But if you've got areas where you've got this sort of knowledge base being created, then it's a much more targeted way for using some of these more advanced applications to really help us get the most out of it.
Well, thank you so much, Ross, for making time for us. I am sorry that I clicked the wrong button and everyone had to do a detour, but in some ways, I think I did a better introduction the second time. So that makes it a bit worth the while. There is an opportunity for you to send follow-up questions. We are recording it and we'll make this available. But I hope this gave you an insight into some of the policy, the mining investment and operating context, and what that means for policy priorities, and then also how we can make our research as fit for purpose and help it reach people that can use it every day. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Ross, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Gillian, and thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.